Ooh. Hey, what's up, everybody? It's your friendly neighborhood fellow traveler here, aka Trav for short. And today I wanted to make a live stream addressing a debate slash discussion slash interaction that I had with a certain someone very recently. Initially, I wanted to make a scripted video going into detail talking about this, but then I really decided that this person was not worth 12 to 20 hours of my life, and that due to just the sheer insincerity and irrelevance of this individual, it really isn't worth it. We are not going to name this weasel. We're just going to refer to him as the weasel. And I better not see anybody name him in the comments or in the live chat. If you name this person, then I'm sorry to say your comment will be deleted. And if you keep trying to name them, then I will have no choice but to ban you. So for now, from here on out, this person shall be referred to as the weasel. We will get into that momentarily. For now, share this stream with your friends, family, and neighbors. Share this stream with your friends, family, and neighbors. I'm going to go ahead and notify. I already went and notified people in the Discord. I'm going to go ahead and notify them again that we are live, because I want to make sure that everybody knows we are live. But again, the main point of this is I want to talk about basically people that are just really dishonest and insincere and that are just total clout chasers. Now, it's one thing if we're going to make videos talking about breadtubers like a Vosh or other people like notably large anarcho-liberal types. That is certainly worth it because, boosts you in the algorithm, its interactions. Well, this person is trying to do the exact same thing, except with Marxist-Leninists. He is trying to game the algorithm by churning out these really shitty low quality essays as much as humanly possible so that they can basically draw eyes and draw attention on their channel. It's a similar tactic used by the likes of Vosh and people like that. Interactions between these channels, it's engagement. It signals the algorithm. It draws eyes and draws attention on these individuals, and that's exactly what they want. And I do not believe this person is a serious or principled human being, and that they're basically trying to drum up and capitalize on this outrage so that they can basically cultivate their own clout. And those of you who know who I'm talking about know exactly what went down in recent days. So this person who has killed and resurrected their channel multiple times has basically started churning out a windmill of bullshit contents, like these really poorly cited, actually not works cited at all. He doesn't provide proof for any of his claims. Video essays where he basically tells you what he wants you to believe and panders to people's inherent anti-communist prejudice. And long story short, this person's basically a philosophically, intellectually bankrupt charlatan with no ideological consistency or principles of any kind. All they're interested in is drawing attention to themselves, compelling people to engage with them, provoking ire and outrage so that they can draw attention to themselves and boost themselves in the algorithm. And I'm telling you all right now, again, ignore this person. Don't watch their videos. Don't engage with any of their contents. Don't give them intention of any kind. And if you are going to respond to them, respond to the ideas that they are incorrect about, but do not name this person themselves, because all that is going to do is help them. Instead, just make videos talking about the subject matter that they are, explaining why they're objectively wrong. And so do not name this person, do not name this person, do not name this person, or your comments will be deleted. And if you frequently name them, you will be banned. So do not name this person. Their name is the weasel. Just refer to this person as the weasel if you're going to call them anything. The weasel, the sophist, the charlatan, those are all appropriate names. So again, no quotations or evidence or works cited to substantiate any of their claims that they make on any of their videos. They just mass churn out these low quality content with no footnotes and tell you what they want you to think without backing any of it up. And fundamentally, they're a sophist. And what a sophist is basically a bad faith actor, someone who really doesn't care about the truth or takes honest discussion seriously. All they do is implore the use of logical fallacies and emotionally manipulative tactics to make themselves look good to their audience during a debate and make their points sound more reasonable than they actually are. And for someone of my position, this is a fairly easy thing to do because communism isn't exactly a popular ideology. Most people are programmed from the day that they are born to have a negative, knee-jerk, gut vitriolic reaction to the word, and they're going to basically, it's going to be easy to pander those sentiments. It's going to be easy to make those emotional appeals. So in his initial video, he pretty much made the same old tired, infantile critiques of the Soviet Union, from commodity production, socialism in one country, there was no workers' control, and then he made this incredibly reaching, asinine statements that they were neoliberal, providing no evidence, stay classy, just telling you what you want to think, and because he validates the audience's pre-programmed prejudice, he can just tell them what they want to think without being questioned, or just sounding credible without being credible. And it really goes to show how easy it is for a lot of these people just to be dishonest charlatans more than anything else. So it just really goes to show. So ironically enough, he says the USSR wasn't socialist because they had commodity production, while self-identifying as a market socialist and declaring Yugoslavia true socialism. Anybody who has a modicum of education on Marxist theory would know exactly how fucking wrong and contradictory this statement is. Really? Yugoslavia, a market economy which produces solely and primarily for commodity production, where the law of value remains dominant, and you can argue a strong case that it is an economy of generalized commodity production. You're going to point to Yugoslavia and say that's socialist, but then you're going to look to the USSR, a country that subjugated the law of value and actually tried to actively decommodify over the course of its existence. You're going to look to that country and you're going to sit there and tell me that the country that subjugated the law of value and where commodity production took on a genuine secondary nature, you're going to look to that country and you're going to tell me that one's not the real socialist one, but the one that matches your bullshit market socialist narrative is. It just demonstrates an incredible poverty of understanding of Marxist theory. But yeah. And then he goes on to contradict himself later on in a discussion he has with Vosh, saying that, commodity production can exist in socialism. Just a complete contradictory bullshit. Just total fucking sophist. Total ideological inconsistency. So I'll be getting to some questions later. But anyways, so I called him out on his bullshit in the comments, and he proceeds to challenge me to a debate on the subject. I'm like, okay, are you sure you want to debate this? You really want to debate whether or not the USSR was socialist? This isn't going to end well for you. And he doubles down. I'm like, are you sure? He's like, yeah. So basically, I say, sure, we can go on Sunday's channel and have him host it. Now, initially, he didn't seem to give a shit whether or not there was a mod. But so when we wanted to actually debate, before it started, we made our introductions, and he went on to pretend to be all civil and charitable and polite. This dude's a complete two-faced loser. He was a total fucking asshole to me pretty much the duration of our interactions and everyone else in my server. But up until that point, he's just making this facade, this two-faced little slimy little facade that, I'm just an honest person. I care about the truth. No, you fucking don't. But anyways, we went on to debate. And after our introductions, he completely fled from the original topic, going on to frame the discussion within the context of political repression of the 1930s, because said repression offended his moral sensibilities, that the USSR was therefore not true socialism. And then when I tried to call him out on that and explain why the conditions of siege and because of the political developments, it's a complex subject, but he doesn't give a shit. I tried to basically point this out, and he moved on to say it was too authoritarian to match Marx and Engels' definition of a DOTP. And then when he failed to conjure quotes to support that point, he moved on to say that workers didn't have control of the means of production. Therefore, it wasn't socialist. And when I presented evidence directly refuting that notion, he immediately dismisses it, completely ignores it, and loops the conversation back around. This whole debate goes in circles for about 45 minutes. I try on multiple occasions to redirect the conversation towards what we actually came to debate: economics. because socialism is an economic mode, but it keeps conflating and going back to the political question and trying to point that, oh, here's something that I can narrow this debate into, this little box. I can have my cake and eat it too. I can simultaneously claim that they're not true socialism while trying to make you look bad in the process by trying to frame you in a position where you have to defend XYZ thing that offends my moral sensibilities. The only mistake I really made in that debate was not asserting myself and directly calling him out for being the fucking bullshit pathological weasel that he is. I tried multiple times to redirect the discussion towards what we actually came to talk about, but every time I did, he proceeds to deflect, cope, and flee, saying that socialism is a political system too, and let's go on to completely ignore the economic aspect in the process, running away from having to defend any of the initial points that he made in his original video. I'm telling you guys, he didn't defend any of his original points. Continues to deflect, and the whole conversation continues in circles, and throughout none of it did he provide any evidence to support any of his claims, let alone spend any time defending any of his original claims, which I really should have just called him on the commodity production point and just stayed on that and forced him to address it, because when you actually go through the quotes and the literature, as I shall demonstrate here in a bit, within every conceivable notion, every conceivable way, it completely fits within the definition of Marx and Engels. The USSR, regardless of how much it offends the moral sensibilities of anarchist liberals and anarcho-liberals, doesn't matter. Socialism is not this moralistic ideal. It is about the material relations that people have with the means of production. It is about the way the economy actually runs and functions. So with all intents and purposes, I won. That debate was over the moment he failed to substantiate any of his original points, but because all he has to do is box it within and frame it within, this complete red herring, this complete non sequitur that, just deflects to something that literally had nothing to do with the original topic. He can come off looking good he can look off looking good in front of his audience without actually having to take any concrete stances. I'm telling you guys, every time I tried to nail him down on anything, he'd literally just flee and run. Like, slippery little weasel this guy is. You don't need to know who I'm talking about. So, again, I repeat, you do not need to know who I'm talking about. This is a public service announcement. This person is a fucking loser. He is not worthy of your time, energy, or attention. So, for all intents and purposes, I won, but because all he has to do is pander to people's inherent reactionary sentiments, he can come off looking good without actually, making a debate or argument for anything. So back in my server, everyone calls him out on his bullshit and showcases the quotes by Marx and Engels directly disproving him, as well as taking the quotes that he tried to cherry pick from Marx and Engels to prove his point, to showcase how it actually doesn't provide any evidence to prove his point. All Marx was saying in that quote is that socialism can only happen in the dictatorship of the proletariat, and then he proceeds to go on to reason circularly that Soviet Union wasn't a DOTP because memorials, feels, because whatever reason, he didn't even make a concrete case to demonstrate that. I provided more evidence during that debate than he did, and he just dismisses it. So he goes on to basically ignore all that, flee from that conversation, and then, some people are saying some bullshit, insulting my intelligence, talking shit about me in my Discord. He's congratulating himself, making his victory laps. He's mirroring the debate, making it out like he won, he destroyed me, and oh, look at this lunatic tanky, he thinks purges are good. Patting himself on the back, getting his little bullshit machine going. And then in the Discord, he explicitly expresses an interest in a second debate, in a rematch himself. He wants to debate, but then he says, oh, if I'm too much of a sore loser to debate again, if I'm too afraid to debate again because I got destroyed, then he's just going to make videos about Soviet economics. Again, surface level understanding, baseless assertions, no evidence. But so I go on to DM him and tell him I will debate you again. Oh, I'll gladly debate it. You want to debate again? We can debate again anytime, any weekend, motherfucker. But you got to come on to my channel unmoderated for 2 hours straight. 45 minutes is not long enough to have a meaningful conversation about this subject. And after going on And having that debate, it made me realize that like having a structured, moderated debate format like that is really only useful if both actors are coming to it in good faith and the moderator is actually going to do their job and make sure that the discussion goes on to actually talk about what they came to talk about. Like, guys, a good moderator isn't just going to make sure both speakers don't interrupt one another. They're also going to make sure that it stays on topic. And unfortunately, they didn't do that. But again, I don't really the blame really just mostly goes on me for not eventually calling him out on his bullshit and just recognizing me just being way too patient and way too charitable to this kid. I should have really just went on to fucking crush him after a certain point. What do we got here? What do we got? Yep, the mode of production is the basis. Socio-political critique is okay, but it's not the way to define socialism. That guy should have known better if he redefines him, if he identifies as a Marxist. He ain't no fucking Marxist. He's a fucking revisionist is what he is. He's this fucking anarcho-liberal market socialist revisionist, intellectually bankrupt charlatan piece of shit. So basically, I tell him that moderated debates, civil discussion are things I personally reserve for people who are serious, intellectually honest human beings that actually are willing to engage in civil discussion themselves. You are not. So you want to debate again, you got to come to my channel, unmoderated, 2 hours straight, no mod. You want to have your little opening statement, you want your little 5 to 10 minute opening statement, fine, whatever. I don't need to prepare an opening statement. I'm happy to give this person the first 5 to 10 minutes of the floor to clarify their case and just take notes. He refused to do this. His original point was, yeah, totally, I'm glad to destroy him all again, but unless he's too much of a butthurt loser, and then he goes from that to being like, oh, you just got to move on, man. You just lost, bro. You totally lost that debate. You're being a sore loser, man. I'm like, motherfucker, you're the one who issued the second challenge in the first place. You're bowing out because I don't think you're I don't think you're a person worthy of having like a civilized, charitable discussion with. I don't think you're a serious human being because you're a fucking weaselly little sophist. So either come to my channel and unmoderated 2 hour back and forth, or nothing at all. He proceeds to flee. And he bows out, he flees, and he's just like, I basically tell him I'm banning you from my Discord because you're just a weasel. He's like, well, I see that you're bad faith because you banned me from your Discord. And I'm like, bro, fuck you, basically. He's just like cope, seethe. He doesn't really give any serious responses to any of my critiques or any of my arguments against him. So, I mean, it just telegraphs how much of an insincere person this guy is. Let me see something real quick. You motherfuckers better not fucking post his name. Just saying. Better not post his fucking name or I will delete your shit and or ban you. So he will be referred to as the Weasley clout-chasing, spineless little grifter, because that's exactly what he fucking is. So, again, just a really good example of someone who's just like a total sophist. I even went to the chat logs, and I don't really want to like show you guys our chat logs because I really don't want you guys to see his name. Just don't worry about it. How long have I been talking? All right, that's sufficient. The first 19 minutes of this is more than sufficient. So this dude's entire game depends on people being outraged by his outrageous claims with no evidence, because he knows that outrages people. He knows that it gets people upset. It provokes an emotional response. That leads to engagement. That engagement, on top of, spamming his bullshit videos and doing his little live debates where he pretends to win when he does anything fucking but, that's how he fuels his channel and his growth. It's a clear tactic employ. And mind you guys, this kid has self-imploded multiple times in the past. This dude's deleted his own channel multiple times in the past. I mean, it should be clear to anyone how much of a pathological narcissist this kid is. I mean, they're just going to show their own ass as time goes on, and they're doomed to self-destruct. So again, don't give this person any attention. Don't engage with any of their content. If you are going to make response videos, if you are going to write anything, respond to the actual arguments, leave out his name, leave out the character, and just explain why this person's full of shit without actually name dropping this person. And when I do make content in the future, I've decided that is going to be the primary route that I shall go. Basically, I mean, unless, you know, he does succeed and he becomes relevant and gains tens of thousands of subs, which isn't going to fucking happen. He ain't going to become popular. Pogan and... Oh, forget that I said that. Dude's fucking irrelevant. Literally can't say. My bad. Just had a little Freudian slip there, but forget that I said that. It's okay. Don't search this person up. They're not worth your time. I'm here to now talk about the second part of this video. We are now going into segment number 2. We are done with this person. No paying attention. Gaming the algorithm. They are the fucking... They're just gaming the algorithm. Insincere grifter. I've said it enough. So where was I? Yes. I am going to go on my little rant about mostly left anti-communists, and anarchism, left liberalism in general. I think it's about time that I expressed my criticisms and my issues with pretty much people who don't identify with Marxism-Leninism. I wouldn't have a problem with these other tendencies anywhere nearly as much if they weren't so like actively and wantonly hostile towards anybody and everybody of that disposition, if they weren't like such overt anti-communists, basically. So these people are a byproduct of a couple different things. One is the individualism that's pre-programmed into people within just liberal society, and America happens to suffer from this shit to an extreme extent, to the point to where people think having like the government or the state or just a community that makes you do something that you don't want to do. I don't want to work, or I don't want to, you know, get vaccinated. These people who fucking prioritize individualism, it's a byproduct of just like the really infantile, rebellious fucking individualism inherent and programmed in American psychology. Like the idea of having like any sort of personal self-sacrifice to the greater good of the group or the community. You know, they don't understand how having that individualism actually is like a form of threat or indirect violence to like the community as a whole. I'm not saying like you can't have different opinions, you can't disagree with things, or you can't do what you want to do. But when you're actively partaking in and engaging in activities that directly undermine public health or the collective will of the majority, or basically you're trying to subvert the democratic process, then yeah, that makes you basically an individualist asshole. So that's the first element. The second element of this is also the Cold War hysteria, the anti-communist narrative that has been programmed into people's mindset. I apologize for this, but I'm going to have to... Nope. I'm going to have to... Shit, how do I delete comments? Also didn't say... What do we got? I'm sorry, guys. I just got derailed. Forget that I said that. Fuck it. Anyways, final warning. Don't say his name, because it looks like I can't delete your comments. All I can do is ban you. So I don't want to ban you guys. Please don't let me ban you. But anyways, where do I go? Where do I go from here? Oh, yes. Because all they know is anti-communist propaganda, they're basically taught that all existing socialist projects that are most popular, the note, all failed and ended in disaster. They were just autocracies where people have no freedom. They're just these poor shithole countries, basically, that just suck. They're taught this narrative, and they're presented this information from a lens that's extremely slanted and extremely convenient for the very same ruling class that they say and know routinely indoctrinates the public and basically brainwashes the public against socialism in the first place. Like these very same people have the critical thinking skills to figure out that the right-wing propaganda, that single-payer healthcare, living wages, and like actually like meaningful democratic economic policy isn't horrible and is actually incredibly beneficial to the public good. They're able to figure this out. They're able to figure out imperialism and war is bad, that the government's lying about this, and that. They're able to figure out that they're being lied to about all this other shit, but somehow these very same people can't put two and two together and figure out that they've been lied to their entire lives and taught an incredibly slanted, biased view of the history of socialism. And so as a result, because of this individualist psychology, because of the fact that these people have a pre-programmed prejudice against communism, because they've internalized the propaganda so much to that point, they basically feel an internal need, because they want socialism themselves. They actually do want socialism at the same time, but they've been taught their entire lives that, in practice, all the projects that do exist failed. They feel a compulsion or a need to distance themselves from that legacy, a need to distance themselves from that history, because, oh, hi there. Hey, you want to debate? You can come on right now, motherfucker. Now or never. Here, I'll send you the StreamYard link. You want to come and have that second debate? It's now or never. It ain't no fucking Coke stream. Come on or be banned. Anyways, as I was saying, come on or be banned, motherfucker. Come on or be banned. So anyways, because they've basically internalized the propaganda to the extent that they basically want to distance themselves from that legacy. They want to get away from that legacy because they've been taught their whole lives that it's bloody. And so for some of them, they feel the need, because a lot of these people are at the same time still just libs. They just like the idea of socialism. To them, it's just this moral ideal rather than something that can really be implemented. To people like this, they basically take it an extra step. They go the extra mile, and they basically become full-on anti-communists. And they basically go out of their way to single out and shit on ML. And it's incredibly common, dude. People think like we MLs, like they like to make it out like we're the ones who are like, super aggressive towards them, like that we have this vitriol, or that we're just these authoritarians that want to crush them out, when the complete opposite is true. These people express the utmost vitriol and disdain for people like us more than anything else. And again, come on stream, pussy. Come on stream. Back your shit up or shut the fuck up. But anyways, because these people have been taught this, they're basically like that. I keep repeating myself. I apologize. But anyways, so they basically take it the extra mile, and they basically become left anti-communists. They go as far as to try and appropriate Marx and Engels, and to try and, co-opt Marx and Engels, or sometimes even Lenin, and go on to say like, oh, look at that legacy. Look at how bloody this legacy was. And they go on to try and say like, oh, well, Marx, Engels, and Lenin would have disapproved, or even Lenin said it was state capitalist. It doesn't meet, my imagined straw man of what I think Marx and Engels meant by socialism and freedom. Therefore, it wasn't true socialism. Like, these people just straw man, water down, and tokenize Marx and Engels. They defang it. They turn Marx and Engels into common liberals with a message that is fundamentally tenable with their internalized bias, basically. So, as a result, these people are incredibly wantonly hostile towards ML. And they're basically aligned with the status quo, whether they recognize it or not in this way. Like, I'm telling you right now, guys, I will work with trots. I'll work with anarchists. I'll have conversations with these people, and I'll be charitable and polite. It's these people that are usually the ones that are hostile towards us. They're the ones that fling all this shit and basically attack us constantly and constantly try to gatekeep us out and denounce us as not being true socialists. They're the ones that do it. And they're the ones that constantly levy these debunked a million times infantile critiques. And as a result, yeah, they just keep backing it. It's a way of coping. It's a way for them to basically, you know, distance themselves from that legacy that they fundamentally don't understand, or because it offends their moral sensibilities. So I'm going to go through pretty much 6 arguments which are incredibly common. If you guys would like to bring other arguments to the table which are incredibly common, I can also debunk those as well. But here are the 6 infantile critiques proposed by left anti-communists that the USSR was not true socialism. And I'm going to go on to run through these debunkings with quotations and direct evidence that refutes it. And then I'm going to go on to explain further in detail how this serves the ruling class and how these people are fucking servants of the ruling class. So, anyways. So, number 1. The USSR was authoritarian, therefore it was not true socialism. Or there was no workers' control in the USSR, therefore not true socialism. We'll start with this. And I'm going to go ahead and make this my... See that shit? We'll just start with that. So, starting and beginning with this, there are a few points that I want to make. Starting with dictatorship and democracy not being diametrically opposed. They're not mutually exclusive. Dictatorship and democracy both can and do exist at the same time. Lenin talks in detail about dictatorship of class in the Proletarian Revolution and the Renegade Kautsky. Lenin, Proletarian Revolution, and the Renegade Kautsky. Here we go. I'm trying to find like legit PDF. Oh, here we go. Democracy for... Here we go. And I'll even show you guys. In order to transform Kautsky's liberal and false assertion into a Marxian and true one must say dictatorship does not necessarily mean the abolition of democracy for the class that exercises the dictatorship of other classes, but it is necessary that the abolition, or the very material restriction, which is also a form of abolition, of democracy for the class over which or against which the dictatorship is exercised. But however true this assertion may be, it does not give a definition of dictatorship. So, like a blind puppy, Kautsky accidentally stumbles upon one true idea. Nevertheless, he failed to give the definition of dictatorship, and moreover, he gave vent to an obvious historical falsehood. That dictatorship means the rule of a single person. This is even grammatically incorrect, since dictatorship may also be exercised by a handful of persons, or by an oligarchy, or by a class. So basically, Kautsky leaves out the context of the dictatorship of class or the rule of class, and basically Lenin goes on within the Proletarian Revolution to show how Kautsky conflates these things and ignores them. He talks about it within the first few pages, and yeah. Not only that, but I also have quotations from Marx, good old Marx, that showcases that socialism can either be democratic or dictatorial. And to reinforce that point of dictatorship and democracy existing simultaneously, even liberals acknowledge this. You ever hear about the founding fathers talking about the need for the electoral college, the reason why the electoral college exists? It's to circumvent what they call the tyranny of the majority. Tyranny of the majority. Oh, man. So, in other words, mob rule. The majority of the population having their say and their way against the wealthy minority. So we need to put these legal restrictions and protections in to circumvent such a thing. And so even they acknowledge this. Even within the traditional liberal framework, they acknowledge the two aren't mutually exclusive. So this argument kind of starts to fall apart when you actually start to think about it deeply. And number 2, let's grant that dictatorship and democracy, or let's grant the notion that there was no workers' control in the USSR. It was just a pure autocracy. It was just a rule by a bunch of bureaucrats, and everybody else had no say whatsoever. I'm going to go on and read the aforementioned quotes. Quote, If the political struggle of the working class assumes violent forms, and if the workers replace the dictatorship of the bourgeoisie with their own revolutionary dictatorship, then they are guilty of the terrible crime of the laissez principle. For, in order to satisfy their miserable, profane daily needs and to crush the resistance of the bourgeois class, they, instead of laying down their arms and abolishing the state, give the state a revolutionary and transitory form. Workers must not even form a single union for every trade, for by doing so they perpetrate the social division of labor as they find it in bourgeois society. This division, which fragments the working class, is the true basis of their present enslavement. Hear that? Workers must not even form a single unions for every trade. For doing so, they perpetuate the social division. Point is that unions aren't really necessary under socialism. They can exist outside of socialism. Number two, communism is still political in nature, democratic or despotic. Democratic or despotic, with the abolition of the state, yet still incomplete. Democratic or despotic, with the abolition of the state, yet still incomplete. The first quote is from Marx on the political indifferentism of 1873, and the second one is Marx' Economic and Philosophic Manuscripts of 1864. I will make sure to provide all of these quotations in a document that I'm going to link in the Discord at a later date. But for now, continuing. So that's the other point. Even if what the narrative, the bullshit Cold War narrative that they speak of is true, and there really was no democracy in the USSR, that could 100% be true. And it could still be socialist, for the simple reason that socialism is an economic mode. It is not a mode of political organization. It doesn't matter. It's fundamentally, well, I mean, it is in a sense, but it's ultimately about people's material relationship to the means of production. Is there a private oligarchy that act as the producers within the context of the economy, or are the workers themselves the producers? Are the workers, do the workers collectively own the fruits of their labor? And yeah, under Soviet-style socialism, they did. So I'm going to go ahead and get to some quotations that help substantiate that point. These are some of the same quotations that I cultivated on the debate that I had. Let's see what I got. What you're saying is dictatorship in this case means suppression of the capitalist class by the workers. Yeah, I mean the absolute rule of the working class. Even if this means like the people that have the bulk of the say in regular economic life are a minority of bureaucrats. Bureaucrats by themselves do not constitute a ruling class. You can say that they're like a power elite or a political elite. You can say that they have an imbalance of political power in their favor. But if they behave and operate in the same way as the workers do, then it doesn't matter either way. Now, if you have a situation where they run the economy on a for-profit basis and they basically collect value off of surplus value and they basically behave like capitalists, like in China, then yeah, you have a case for state capitalism. This was not the case in the USSR. So finally, let me get to these quotes. I'm going to go ahead and full screen to vindicate my case. Let's see. The Marxian law of value holds generally, as far as economic laws are valid at all, for the whole period of simple commodity production, that's up to the time when the latter suffers a modification through the appearance of the capitalist form of production. Up to that time, prices gravitate towards the values fixated according to the Marxian law of value and oscillate around those values. So the more fully simple commodity production develops, the more the average prices over long periods, uninterrupted by external violent disturbances, coincide with values with negligible margin. Thus, the Marxian law of value. Wait, this is for the point on commodity production. I'm going to come back to that. I actually have a better quote on the MCM circuit. Here we go. In the circuit, MCM, the same piece of money changes its place twice. The seller gets it from the buyers and buys it from another seller. The complete circulation begins with the receipt, concludes with payment of money for commodities. It is very contrary to the circuit MCM. Here it is not the piece of money that changes its place twice, but the commodity. The buyer takes it from the hands of the seller and passes it to the hands of another buyer. just a simple circulation of commodities. The double change of place of the same piece of money affects its passage from one hand into another. Here's the double change of pace of the same commodity brings about the reflux of the money to its point of departure. So, what this basically means is that there is a difference between the MCM and CMC circuit, and we'll get to that in a second. So I'm going to read this right here because this is really essential. This is going to touch up on the commodity production point. You know what? Fuck that. We'll get to these points here in a bit on the commodity production section because these are more relevant to that. But what I'm going to say on this point that they were indeed socialist, and I will vindicate this when we get to the commodity production and the way the economy actually operated here in a moment, is that under capitalism, the capitalist class are the producers. They purchase a commodity, which is the M. They exchange the M, which is the labor power, and of course the capital that they own, the means of production. So you've got the M, and in exchange for that, they exchange that for commodities, which are produced by the collective of the firm. They purchase the labor power from the worker. They take the commodities which are produced by the firm, which they own. Remember, in capitalism, the capitalists are the producers and they are the exploiters. And then they take these commodities produced by the firm onto the private market and exchange it for M, for money. But they're not just trying to get the money back that they put into it. They're trying to get greater returns on investment, greater and greater returns on investment. This is the relationship to the means of production. The worker spends money to survive. He exchanges his labor power, his time, for, which is a commodity, the only commodity he has to sell, for money. And then he goes on to take this money and exchange it for another commodity. Workers spend money to survive, but the capitalist spends money, i.e. investment, to make more money. Capitalists are both the producers and exploiter because workers irrevocably are always going to be paid less than the value of the product sold. So workers do not get paid for the true value of their labor, but for their labor power, which by design is always going to be worth less than the true fruits of the labor collectively produced by the firm. How this is different in the Soviet Union is that the workers genuinely were the producers because everything was public property. Because within the Stalin Constitution itself, within the planning process itself, everything was nationalized and turned into public property. Because of this, workers were now the producers. The exploitative component has been removed. The workers are producers. They collectively own the fruits of the firm, the C, the commodity. They take the collective fruits by the firm and collectively they are sold in exchange for M, money time payments, to the workers who are the producers. There are no exploiters in this equation, so they are remunerated M in respect to the fruits of their labor. So they're remunerated according to their labor time, which they exchange for C. So in this way, there is the dynamic is completely different. It's not an MCM circuit, it's a CMC circuit. But unlike feudalist commodity production, where workers produce individually and you have simple commodity production for wholesale on local markets, instead, it has the element of capitalism's generalized commodity production applied to the collective production and labor process. Because the workers own the means of production, they therefore own the fruits of their labor. The component of the capitalist class has been removed. And because the economy operates according to a common plan, a rational plan, that means inputs and outputs are predetermined and they are selected through the overall planning process. So this is basically how one of the ways in which the Soviet Union was socialist, also in the sense that they subjugated the law of value and the form of surplus extraction took on a completely different form. Marx talks about this in Capital Volume 3. He says the specific economic form is determined by hold on a second. I'm just going to dig up the quote. Here it is. The specific economic form in which unpaid surplus labor is pumped out of direct producers determines the relationship of ruler and ruled as it grows directly out of production itself and in turn reacts upon it as a determining element. Upon this, however, it is found the entire formation of the economic community which grows up out of the production of relation themselves, thereby simultaneously in its specific political form. So the economic form gives rise to the political form. and it basically determines the relations of ruler and ruled. Under Soviet Union, we saw a different form of surplus extraction. A form of surplus extraction where they were investing, but it was in the pursuit of greater material outputs and greater degrees of net material product versus pure gross domestic product. So in this way, money took a secondary subjugated role. And because of this, we saw no business cycles. We saw no massive income inequality. I don't know, I'm not going to Google it right now, but there was vast economic inequality that flatlined during the duration of the communist years and shot back up with the restoration of capitalism. According to Albert Zizmansky, an economic researcher, Eastern European economist, according to his research, the worst wealth gap between the highest and lowest earners in the USSR was a 10-to-1 ratio at the absolute worst. And mind you, the people making the most money were not the bureaucrats. They were movie producers, engineers, famous artists, and just high-ranking just professionals. Bureaucrats were not the most well-paid people within the Soviet Union. So in this way, because it's an economic question, because this is how the economy actually operated, and this is how the Soviet Union was socialist, basically. They subjugated the law of value. They did have commodity production, and we'll get to quotes by Stalin and to Marx again here in a moment. But the main point I'm trying to drive home is even if there was 0% democracy whatsoever, it would still be socialist. It would just be an undemocratic socialist system. But again, he's wrong on that point as well, and we'll get to that in a second. Yeah, that's right, pussy. You ain't gonna come and you ain't gonna step to me because you know you're gonna get blown the fuck out. Notice how he comes in and says it's a cope stream, and then he immediately flees because he's a little bitch. But anyways, you know you'd get fucking spanked because you don't know what the fuck you're talking about. But anyways, now let's get on to these other quotes. This was a point that I tried to make during the debate. So in regards to Stalin, a couple things. The entire Central Committee, he only had one vote. The power he wielded was comparable to that of the President of the United States. He was basically like a president without term limits, but lack of term limits does not make one a dictator inherently. He tried to step down numerous times, but kept getting reappointed to his post. And he had genuine popular support for a number of reasons, the main ones being that his ideas were popular and pragmatic, and that he was an incredibly skilled organizer and bureaucrat. There was a genuine populist component behind Stalin. People try to attribute everything that ever happened in the USSR to him, like he was just this omnipotent dictator that was absolutely in control of absolutely everything. But the actual investigation of the history shows that behind Stalin was an incredibly enthusiastic and popular pioneering spirit of the Soviet people from below, the volunteers in the Communist Party, members of the Communist Party, basically most of the population, pioneering spirit, authentically and genuinely went along with this because they all felt like they were building a better future, and because they saw the direct benefits from the fruits of this project. You know, they all grew up during Tsardom when they basically were poor and illiterate and had really not much going for them. Soviets come in, change everything, and provide these people with a fairly quality modern life and give these people some dignity, but when before they were living like a bunch of fucking animals, basically. So yeah, it wouldn't have been possible. The masses make history. If it wasn't for the masses and the popular will from the people below, Soviet project really wouldn't have been possible in the first place. It did not really have the capacity because of the general weakness of the Communist Party. It didn't have the capacity to exercise the autocratic control that people think it did. In Stalinist Terror, New Perspectives, and Origins of the Great Purge, as well as some works by Robert Thurston. I've got a summary from him, but I'm just going to go through Origins of the Great Purge because I actually read this. So, from Origins of the Great Purge, according to most Western views, political power was transmitted from the top to bottom, from the center to the localities. Command originated in the Central Committee or the Secretariat, and was passed down through the national parties, territories, regions, and districts to the cells. The structure was designed to ensure that the control from the top was maintained through direct command and through the nomenclatura. The power of personal confirmation, theoretically, every committee was completely subordinate to the ones above it, and individual members had no power or control at all. The political reality was much different. In fact, the chain of command collapsed more often than it functioned. The Communist Party, far from penetrating every corner of Russian life, was more of an undisciplined and disorganized force with little influence outside the cities. Soviet Russia in the 30s resembled a backward traditional society more than it did a sophisticated order of totalitarianism. Another quote. Even in Stalin's time, this is the CIA telling us this, the people tasked with shitting on communism and sponsoring right-wing think tanks designed to discredit the system in every way imaginable. Admitting internally in a document, again, I'll link all this later, but even in Stalin's time, there was collective leadership. The Western idea of a dictator within the communist setup is exaggerated. Misunderstandings on that subject are caused by a lack of comprehension of the real nature and organization of the communist power structure. Stalin, although holding wide powers, was merely the captain of a team, and it seems obvious that Khrushchev will be the new captain. There you go. So again, he was most powerful person in the country, but I mean, he served a role very similar to that of the president of the United States. In fact, basically. He was more bureaucrat. Jobs under socialism, like leadership positions, are treated more as positions that people are chosen for as just like qualified professionals, rather than they are like statuses, it is hierarchical, but it's more of just like a function, and it's seen as more of a function than it is like a position of wealth and privilege. Like, I'm not going to say like members of the Communist Party, like members of the Central Committee, weren't living better than like your average industrial worker, but like the disparity between them and like average industrial workers is largely exaggerated. I mean, I'm sure like you can dig up cases where like there's corruption and foul play, but again, I'm talking about like the real trends, the real economic trends and the way things operated. So I have some direct firsthand accounts of people, Pat Sloan and Louis Strong, teacher as well as journalist, who both directly lived in the USSR, spent years living in it. They lived it. They participated in the elections and the democratic process, as well as the collective decision-making, which went on within the local regions that they were involved in. Here's some quotes, first from Anne Louise Strong. Month by month in the past 12 years, I've seen campaigns and continuous efforts to draw wide popular masses into these governing tasks. Every kitchen must learn to rule the state. This slogan of Lenin served as a carrying call to millions of suppressed literate women, and in the decades gone by, if eternal vigilance is the price of liberty, and vigilance relaxed is a source of democracy's woes, then eternally participating activity is the price of the socialist order. And it is a harder task. Factory hands, housewives, farm laborers, the great working masses had to be stirred, prodded, and energized into active part and rule. Production meetings after the work discuss shop problems, what hold back production, how much it can be increased. From the coming year, these discussions are enlarged on a factory scale. They go up from the factory to the central office of the trust. Word comes down to the shop again that the country needs certain new machines. Can we make them in our plant? And here's workers' invention and suggestion widened to include a nation's plans. Delegates from other industries which need machines arrive, explain, mutually consult. For a socialist state, this implies this is the simplest, most basic act over government. Workers planning expansion and improvements of publicly owned properties. Township land departments or the farm expert from the tractor station draw up their farmer plan. Number of households, of peoples, of horses, plows, tractors extends, the type of land must be included. The plan must take into account of little community food and fodder needs, past crop rotations, marketable crop recommendations by the state for their locality. From this simple economic base, all other tasks of government begin. In every task, planning, execution, checking, these masses take part. Taxing and housing commissions, social insurance commissions, sanitary commissions, social insurance commissions, Sanitary commissions, complaint commissions are all carried out by unpaid labor of millions, serving by secretarial work of a smaller number of full-time officials. So people were constantly being brought in, encouraged, and actively partaking in like social work and having collective decision making, like from what needs to be done and how to like better improve the planning process. Again, so this is workers' control in action. Another example, Pat Sloan actively partook in elections. He taught while in the USSR. He says, I have, while working in the Soviet Union, participated in an election. I too had the right to vote. And I was a working member of the community. And I nationally and citizenship have no bar in electoral rights. The procedure was extremely simple. A general meeting of all workers in our organization was called by the Trade Nation Committee. Candidates were discussed, and a vote was taken by show of hands. Anybody present had the right to propose a candidate, and one who was elected was not personally a member of the party. I have more documentation, a whole book about Soviet elections, a whole book about workers' participation, and I have the Stalin Constitution, which we will go into right here. Stalin Constitution. Let's go into it. I really want to hammer this point home because of how relevant it is. So, they had secret ballots, the electoral system. Members of all Soviets of the Working People's Deputies of the Supreme Soviets, the Soviets of Working People's Deputies of the territories and regions, the Supreme Soviets of Autonomous Republics, the Soviets of Working People's Deputies of Autonomous Regions, of Sinistas, villages, hamlets, kishlaks, all Soviets of Working People's Deputies are chosen by the electors on the basis of universal, direct, and equal suffrage by secret ballot. Elections of deputies are universal. All citizens of the USSR who have reached the age of 18, irrespective of race, nationality, religion, educational and residential qualifications, social origin, property status, or past activities, have the right to vote in an election of deputies and to be elected, with the exception of insane persons and persons who have been convicted by the court of law and whose sentences include deprivation of electoral rights. Election of deputies are equal. Each citizen has one vote. All citizens participate in elections on equal footing. Women have the right to elect and be elected on equal terms with men. Citizens serving in the Red Army have the right to elect and be elected on equal terms with all citizens. Voting on all elections is secret. Candidates for elections are nominated according to electoral areas. It is our duty of every deputy to report his electors on his work and the work of the Soviet People's Deputies. He is liable to be recalled at any time in the manner established by law upon decision of the majority of the electors. So, from the bottom to the top, people had direct say in who they had representing them. Is there a case to be made that in practice this Constitution was not able to completely, meaningfully put this in action? If you want to make that case, all the burden of proof lies on you to make that case. However, based on the anecdotes, the primary documentations, the first-hand accounts I've provided thus far, based on all the evidence and information I've presented thus far, based on what it says straight up in their own Constitution, which is they gave universal suffrage before America did, so that speaks testimonies about the pursuit of equality that they are trying to demonstrate and trying to pursue. In all this evidence, all the evidence being presented thus far, I think there is a reasonable case to make that there was workers' control in the USSR. You know, people are going to make the case, oh, well, you couldn't criticize or talk shit on Stalin or talk shit on like leadership in the Central Committee. You couldn't talk shit about the Communist Party or the system. And maybe that's true. You can't criticize basically the president. You can't criticize the government too harshly. But you know what? You know who you can criticize? Your manager and your bosses, the people who have way more direct say over your personal life and your endeavors at work than the people at the very top. And I'm just going to say this right now. We should have freedom to criticize whoever we want, but I would rather have the freedom of criticism and the ability to recall and control the people that are directly above me and directly manage me And I would rather be able to criticize and hold that person accountable than the person at the very, very, very tip top, because one of these people has more direct say and control over my daily affairs than the other one does. There you go. So, in every possible way, this point that I'm trying to make right here, let me go up here. So, dictatorship and democracy, not mutually exclusive. Number 2, even if the Cold War narrative of totalitarianism is true, it is possible to have undemocratic socialism, even within the Marxian conception of the term. Number 3, that narrative is bullshit regardless. I just presented a shit ton of evidence that showcases that there was indeed democracy and workers' control in the USSR. It was by no means perfect, but you can't say that they weren't a DOTP in light of this, and so on, especially when you look at their constitution. So what's the next point? What's the next common infantile point that we see? USSR had commodity production. Therefore, it was not true socialism. Before we move on to there, I want to make one last point on the question of the political system. I just want to quote Marx from the Gotha in regards to the question of the democracy or lack thereof. From Gotha, Marx himself once again says, what we have to deal with here is a communist society, not as it has developed on its own foundations, but on the contrary, just as it emerges from capitalist society, which is thus in every respect, economically, morally, and intellectually, still stamped with the birthmarks of the old society from whose womb it emerges. Accordingly, the individual producer receives back from society, that the rest of that's not relevant. But the point is, byproduct of the conditions, it's kind of hard to have perfect, decentralized, idealized, perfect socialism, pure socialism, which matches the ideal in a material world where conditions are far from ideal and the whole world basically wants you dead. Remember, on the cusp of the socialist Bolshevik revolution, the imperialist powers basically came down. 15 countries invaded. They tried to crush it. And even if the revolution ultimately turns out to be undemocratic and faulty, even if it doesn't match my ideal or it offends my moral sensibilities, I will take an undemocratic socialism over capitalism 10 times out of 10, because, I mean, one, you don't get opportunities to build socialism very often, as far as time is seen. And 2, as much of the evidence I've presented in the past shows, if you maintain the socialist path, even if it's a flawed, faulty socialism, it's still going to drastically improve people's lives and take the country in a much better direction had they maintained the capitalist road, the democratic capitalist path, even though capitalism is not really democratic. And it just basically depends on constantly manipulating people. And the third thing is, even if it is undemocratic, but if it manages to survive, you've got yourself socialism that's flawed, but it's surviving and it's existing and it's still here. It's still here and it still exists. In such a situation, there's a chance in the future that socialism can be reformed and made better. It can be made more democratic. It can be reformed. It's got all these problems, but at least it's surviving. At least it can circumvent capitalist encirclements. At least in the future, there's a chance that could be reformed and that could come closer to the ideal socialism that I want to exist and that I want to be put into practice. But again, survival first and work on your improvements down the line. Anarchists and a lot of these leftists seem to just be hyper-emphasizing the end result without really considering pragmatically the pressures of the real world. And then when you bring this shit up, they'll fucking walk back on it and they'll be like, oh, well, I concede. I understand the need to suppress fascists and yada, yada. And I can see the need for repression against political enemies. They'll even acknowledge this implicitly, but then they'll selectively apply their outrage to the Soviets and to the communist revolutions that did exactly that. So let's talk about commodity production, because that's the next important point in all of this. So in regards to that point right here, commodity production. Sorry it took me so long to get to this. As Engels discusses right here, Law of value holds generally, as far as economic laws are valid, for the whole period of simple commodity production, that up to the time of the latter suffers a modicum modification through the appearance of the capitalist form of production. So Engels is saying here that commodity production has prevailed for thousands of years. He says it right here. Thus, the Marxian law of value has general economic validity for a period lasting for the beginning of exchange, which transforms products into commodities down to the 15th century of the present era. But the exchange of commodities dates back from a time before all written history, which in Egypt goes back to at least 2500 BC and perhaps 5000 BC, and in Babylon 4000 BC, perhaps 6000 BC. Thus, the law of value has prevailed during a period of 5 to 7,000 years. So, commodity production and the law of value have existed within the context of previous economic systems, and as alluded to in various Marxist quotes, it will, on some level, continue to exist under socialism. In Critique of the Gotha, Marx talks about remuneration according to labor time until the higher phase of communism can be reached, that workers will have to be paid according to their time because you can't distribute according to need yet. So on some level, exchange has to continue to take place. And wherever you have exchange, wherever you have markets, you have commodities, and vice versa. And to some degree, the law of value still does exist. So there's a lot of misinterpretation of like Engels and anti-Turing, and Stalin even addresses this in Economic Problems of the USSR. So this is a main point. I'm just going to leave that there. But anyways, commodity production. Moving on. As a matter of fact, capitalist production is commodity production as the general form of production. It is so and becomes so more and more in the course of its developments because labor itself appears as a commodity. Because the laborer sells his labor, that is, the functions of his labor power, and our assumption is that he sells it at its value determined by the cost of reproduction, how much it costs to keep the worker showing up to the job. To the extent that labor becomes a wage labor, the producer becomes an industrial capitalist. For this reason, the capitalist production, and hence also commodity production, does not reach its full scope until the direct agricultural producer becomes a wage laborer. In the relation of capitalists and wage labor, the money relation, the relation between the buyer and the seller, becomes a relation inherent to production. But this relation has its foundation in the social character of production, not in the mode of exchange. The social character. The latter conversely emancipates from the former. It is, however, quite in keeping with the bourgeois horizon, everyone being engrossed with the transaction of shady business, do not see in the character of the mode of production the basis of the mode of exchange corresponding to it. So at the end right here, he's basically saying wage labor becomes a hidden contract of exploitation, and that it is true that the capitalist is making a fair bargain for the worker's labor. He's paying the market price for the value of the reproduction cost of the worker. He exchanged the worker his wage labor payments, and the capitalist is now the owner of that wage labor, the commodity. He's also the owner of the means of production, another commodity. Generalized commodity production basically means that commodity production has reached its highest, most streamlined form, where it's basically the sole and primary way which all goods are produced, and it's basically done because the capitalist mode of production is only concerned with growth and ever-increasing realization of the returns on investment. They mix the worker's labor time, the commodity he purchased, with money, as well as the means of production, the commodity he purchased with money. So he's got his M, trades that for the C, mixes these two together, being the owner, producer, proprietor, and exploiter. He mixes these together. He gets his commodities, puts them on sale on the private market in exchange for returns on investment. So what we have here is a little MCM bar. So under feudalism, that's MCM bar. Or no, that's capital. My bad. This is feudalism. C M. Here's the differences. Under feudalism, peasants are the producer. Barons are the exploiter. Peasants pay rent to baron, but produce handicraft goods on an individual basis. So you can have a cobbler. The cobbler exchanges his commodity. He produces his shoes. He's from many generations of cobblers. He exchanges that commodity for money, as well as producing some of those shoes for the baron. And he uses that money, which he exchanged on the local market, to buy another commodity, fruit or, produce, like so on. He's, providing a good or service in exchange for money for another good or service. Capitalist epoch is defined by this. The capitalist is both the producer and the exploiter. He owns the labor power, which the workers trade for a wage. So that's the relation for the capitalist, MCM bar, and the relation for the worker is just CMC. This is what I was saying earlier about workers spending money to, damn you, why are you being like this? Fuck it. Why is my keyboard being stupid? Fuck it. Here. So the relation for the workers is workers spend money to survive. They trade their labor power for the money, and then they spend that money to survive. Capitalists spend money to make money. That's what drives the whole system. Under socialism, workers own the means of production. They own the workplace and the commodities that are produced by the workplace. Let me not forget to mention that labor takes on a socialized nature under capitalism. Now, labor is now a socialized collective endeavor on part of entire firms encompassing dozens, hundreds, and thousands of individuals. You've got the people who pull the levers, the truck drivers, you've got the safety inspectors, the retail workers, you've got people that are a part of this entire chain of production, this production process. And under socialism, there's still that chain of production being done by workers. So labor, like capitalism, is socialized, but workers are the producers. Now, within such a paradigm, it is possible to, in theory, have a functioning socialist economy with no growth whatsoever. A steady state economy where there is no growth. You can have that and be sustainable within the context of socialism. Capitalism, not so much. So in this paradigm, it's theory. In theory, it is possible to do such a thing. But historically, socialist countries have had to grow and do need to grow so that they can eventually reach a stage to where they can actually go beyond commodity production. So let me go ahead and pull up Stalin's economic problems of the USSR. So moving on. Economic problems of the USSR. Oh, was I not sharing the screen the entire time? Well, that's it. Yeah. Might be, guys. Might be. Moving on. So he even addresses this in Economic Problems of the USSR. And how people quote Engels from Anti-Düring. So elsewhere in Anti-Düring, Engels speaks, right here. So certain comrades affirm that the party acted wrongly in preserving commodity production. They quote Engels, who says, with the seizing of means of production, production of commodities is done away with, and simultaneously the mastery of production over the producer. Let's explain where they're mistaken. Engels' formula. Engels' formula cannot be considered fully clear and precise because it does not indicate whether it is referring to the seizure of society of all or only part of the means of production. That is, whether all or only part of the means of production are converted into public property. Hence, this formula of Engels may be understood either way. Anti-Düring speaks of mastering all means of production or taking possession of all means of production. Hence, this formula of Engels has in mind the nationalization of basically everything. I'm paraphrasing to save time. It follows that Engels has in mind countries where capitalism and the concentration of production have advanced far enough in both industry and agriculture to permit the expropriation of all means of production in the country and the conversion into public property. Engels considers that in such countries, parallel with socialization of all means of production, commodity production should be put an end to. So basically, when production becomes centralized enough to that point, but the reason why they chose to preserve commodity production was basically because they had not reached that point. So there was only one such country at the close of the last century when Anti-During was published, Britain. There's the development of capitalism and the concentration of production in both industry and agriculture has reached such a point that it has been possible in the event of the assumption of power by the proletariat to convert all the country's means of production into public property and to put an end to commodity production. I leave aside in the instance the question of the importance of the foreign trade to Britain and the vast part that plays in international economy. I think that only after an investigation, yada, yada, yada. So we cannot, of course, regard as an answer the opinion of certain half-baked Marxists who believe that under such a condition, the thing to do is to refrain from taking power and to wait until capitalism has succeeded in ruining millions of small and medium producers and converting them into farm laborers and in concentrating the means of production in agriculture, and that only after this would it mean possible to consider the assumption of power by the proletariat and the socialization of all means of production. Naturally, the socialization which Marxists can't accept if they do not want to disgrace themselves completely. Nor can we regard an answer to the opinion of other half-baked Marxists who think the thing to do would be to assume power and expropriate the small and medium rural producers and to socialize their means of production. Marxists cannot adopt this senseless and criminal course either because it would destroy all chances of victory for the proletarian revolution. The answer to this question is given by Lenin. Lenin answers may briefly be summed as follows. Favorable conditions for the assumption of power should not be missed. The proletariat should assume power without waiting until capitalism has succeeded in ruining the millions of small and medium producers. The means of production and industry should be expropriated and converted into public property. As the small and medium individual producers, they should be gradually united in producer cooperatives. Industry should be developed to the utmost, and collective farms should be placed in the modern technical basis of large-scale production, but on the contrary, generally supplying them with first-class tractors and machines. In order to endure an economic bond between town and country, between industry and agriculture, commodity production should be preserved for a certain period, it being the form of economic tie to the town, which is alone acceptable to the peasants and Soviet trade, state, cooperative, and collective farm. Should be developed to the full and the capitalists of all types and descriptions ousted from trading activity. The history of socialist construction in our country has shown that this path of development mapped out by Lenin has fully justified itself. So there you have it. The eventual abolition of commodity production is something that can only take place over a protracted period of time. As noted by the quotes that I supplied by Marx and Engels, it is going to continue to exist to some degree or another within the context of socialist society, but within such a society, commodity production in and of itself does not inherently entail an exploitative relationship. And number two, it does not necessarily assume that it doesn't presuppose capitalism, because capitalism isn't defined inherently by commodity production. Because if it was, you could literally identify every civilization that has existed since like 10,000 BC as capitalist, when really it's a very recent phenomenon which has emerged out of the Renaissance, colonial, and industrial era of Western Europe. So this is the point that kills the left com. But again, market socialists who make this point are being completely disingenuous, or they just don't know what the fuck they're talking about. Even if like within the context of market socialism, you would still have like that dynamic of an exploitative relationship. It would just be done by a handful of wealthy co-ops versus like the majority of not so wealthy co-ops. I mean, you would eventually see, because of the random interactions, and because within a market economy where the law of value remains supreme and commodity production is the dominant form of production, you would eventually see the concentration of wealth into the hands of a minority of co-ops versus the majority. And this would be a natural organic trend. Not to mention, wage labor is not the only form of exploitation that exists within capitalism. You could very well have a kind of outsourcing which takes place within co-ops. You could also have not just outsourcing that takes place in co-ops, rents, dividends, loans. There are other ways in which co-ops can exploit other co-ops and basically, gain competitive advantage because it's still a market economy. And that is eventually what you would see, and you would basically see the inevitable reemergence and restoration of capitalism. At the very least in the USSR, they actually tried and made a meaningful attempt to genuinely move away from such a society. Now one can make the argument that they took the revisionist path, and that there's certainly an argument to be made for that, and that they basically lost sight of the goals of communism, and because of this, it ended up leading to a political crisis by which capitalism was inevitably restored. But the point is that Soviet socialism was infinitely closer than any sort of market socialism will ever be. So what else we got here? There was exploitation in the USSR, therefore it was not true socialism. I refer once again to the quote by Marx, where he refers to the specific economic form giving way to the relations between rulers and ruled. So, where are we? Let us now picture to ourselves, by the way, hold on a second. Where is it? Where are you? Where are you? Specific economic form, where are you? There you are. Specific economic form, which unpaid surplus labor is pumped out of direct producers, determines the relationship of rulers and ruled as it grows out directly from the production itself, and in turn reacts upon it as the determining element. So basically, surplus extraction is not the same thing in socialism. It's not the same thing as surplus value. Under socialism, workers are paid for the value of the product of their labor produce. They're remunerated according to their work. So by design, they're going to make more than what they would under capitalism. They're going to make above and beyond their own reproduction costs. Furthermore, deductions are going to be made. Marx talks extensively about this in Critique of the Gotha program. Let me go ahead and pull up Gotha. This is a common misconception as well. People try to make this infantile critique. So, let's see. So, let's see. Equal right is still here in principle, bourgeois right. So yeah, in spite of this advance, this equal right is still constantly stigmatized by a bourgeois limitation. The right of the producer is proportional to the labor they supply. The equality consists in the fact that the measurement is equal standard labor. So where do we go? Where we got here, right, by its very nature. I'm looking for the section where he talks about undiminished proceeds. Undiminished equal right, and then the other, where are you? Useful labor, a fine conclusion, only so for therefore accuse the individual worker. I'm looking for where he's talking about how deductions have to be made, and that you can't just pay people the full proceeds of their labor. Otherwise, you're going to have nothing left over to reproduce society. So you need, basically, you need surplus to be generated for reinvestment, to increase economic growth, to increase outputs, to improve productivity, to basically pay for the unproductive sectors of the economy, and to basically keep civilization running. And that's how it worked in the Soviet Union. The profitable firms and industries, which generated turnover from their profits from their turnover, That's where the state got a lot of its revenue, and it used the revenue from the turnover generated from its profitable industries to subsidize and prop up the unprofitable industries. So yeah. So where am I looking? I just want to read that quote because it is very important. Where he talks about, where are you? If anyone knows the page number, let me know. I'm looking for where he talks about, oh, here we go. Let us first all proceeds of labor in the sense of the product of labor. The cooperative proceeds of labor are a total social product. From this, it must now be deducted. First, cover the replacement of the means of production. Second, additional portion for expansion, investment. Third, reserve of insurance funds to provide against accidents, dislocations, natural calamities, etc. These deductions from the undiminished proceeds of labor are an economic necessity, and magnitude is to be determined according to available means and forces, and partly by a computation of probabilities. And not only that, but he goes on to say that before this is divided among individuals, first, the general cost of administration not belonging to production, this will be from the outset considerably restricted in comparison. Second, that of which is intended for the common satisfaction of needs, health services from the outset. This part grows considerably in comparison with present-day society. Third, front funds who are unable to work. Right here. He says it right here in the Gotha. This is the quotation. Like, what, page 9, page 10? I've made my point. So, where are we? I got 3 other points that I was going to review. Not true socialism because socialism in one country is impossible. Also not true. Lenin talks about this, and he alludes to it in his, I'm looking for it, in a letter. Where are you? Here we go. It's in a letter. Who assert that power should not. Oh, here it is. It's a quotation from his report on foreign policy. Excuse me. This quotation is from Lenin's report on foreign policy in 1918. Let me go ahead and share that quotation. Yes, let us do this. So, profitable and required industry, Soviet steel manufacturing. Unprofitable but socially important industry, film industry, something like that, yeah. Steel manufacturing was, heavy industry wasn't particularly profitable. When I refer to like profitable industry, some of them were. Like grain was where they got initially a large bulk of their revenue. But as time went on, they diversified their assets and over time became a major exporter of a lot of industrial goods like machinery, means of production, and they would go on to basically export and sell that. So this is what I'm talking about by profitable industries. But yeah, that's a decent example of what I'm referring to. They also opened up a lot of domestic mines and foundries and a lot of harvesting plants, which for all intents and purposes would have been way more rational from a capitalist standpoint to just outsource. You could outsource that shit to your poor SSRs. You could outsource that shit to some second or third world. The point is that they could have outsourced that for the sake of profitability, but they didn't. Instead, they decided to put their own people to work in their own industries. They actually made a lot of choices that caused them to suffer because they were economically, they were not making the best choices from a profitability standpoint. Socialism in one country. All right. Lenin talks about this in his report on foreign policy. I know that there are, of course, wisecracks with high opinions of themselves and even calling themselves socialists who assert that labor should not have been taken until the revolution broke out in all countries. They do not realize that in saying this, they are deserting the revolution and going over to the side of the bourgeoisie. To wait until the working classes carry out a revolution on an international scale means that everyone will remain suspended in midair. This is senseless. Everyone knows the difficulties of a revolution. It may begin with brilliant successes in one country and then go through in agonizing periods since final victory is only possible on a world scale and only by the joint efforts of the workers of all countries. To wait until the working class carry out the revolution in an international scale means that everybody will remain suspended in mid-air. This is senseless. Everybody knows the difficulties of a revolution. So, yeah, here it is. Quotation from Lenin. He directly talks about this. So, socialism in one country comes from Lenin. It doesn't come from Stalin. And people who disavow socialism in one country don't realize, like, what is the alternative? Should they have just given up and basically not even tried and just converted to a liberal democracy? Like, people don't realize, like, there is no alternative. I mean, you can either build socialism on the home front and try to construct a working model until conditions become more tenable for the spread of revolution, or you can not do that and basically revert to capitalism. So that's basically it. Lenin said it was state capitalism, so it must be true. Again, cue 1930s central planning and all the evidence I've presented thus far. Let's see, bureaucrats as a class. I've kind of talked about this a bit before, but bureaucrats do not have a unique relationship to the means of production with respect to other workers. They don't own means of production. They don't own the capital. They aren't exploiting wage labor. They can't decide what various firms and industry do according to profitability. They have to adhere to a common plan that is collectively drafted. They have rules that they have to abide by. They don't behave like capitalists. And yeah, that's basically it. They're just social workers. They're social workers. You know, you want to argue that, oh, well, they abused their power, they did this, and that, and then that's fine. But when we actually look at the way things operated, when we actually look at their role in the production process, they don't behave like private capitalists. They aren't behaving like private capitalists at all. It's not like in China where you've got like high-ranking government bureaucrats, which are just basically collecting vast sums of revenue from state-owned enterprises and operating these state-owned enterprises. It's not the same relationship at all. So yeah, bureaucrats are not capitalists. It's a false equivalence. So where else are we? Oh yeah, this is an asinine point he tried to make that the weasel cannot substantiate at all. This point right here. The weasel has tried to make this point. Again, totally baseless assertion based off no evidence. The idea that the Soviet Union was neoliberal is like the most unfounded, unsubstantiated point that you could possibly make when you consider to the degree to which they took care of the public good and to the degree and the mountain of evidence that they actively went out of their way to improve the quality of their life for their people and put the quality of their life for their people first, prioritizing social advancement, prioritizing cultural improvement and the arts and endeavors, scientific, and so on. I mean, even if you want to argue that, like, even if you want to argue that there was a power elite, I mean, based on all the evidence I've seen, like, Kotkin, anti-communist historian, has gone on to say this, but, like, when the Soviet archives were originally cracked open, the Cold War historians were foaming at the mouth to see what the private conversations were between the leadership within Moscow. Like, because they talked a great deal, and they spoke a great deal of socialist rhetoric in public. They talked about the bourgeoisie, the imperialists, building socialism, capitalist encirclement. That's the rhetoric they used in public. They wanted to see what their private thoughts were, their private opinions, because as Hillary Clinton said, we have our public and our private opinions. And that when the Soviet archives were cracked open and when these private conversations between various individuals were revealed, it was found that the rhetoric and conversations they had in public were the exact same ones they were having in private. When you consider this, when you consider what I spoke of earlier, where according to research from Albert Zizmansky and other economists, like, the worst wealth gap was either a 3-to-1 ratio to up to a 10-to-1 ratio, and bureaucrats weren't even the ones making the most money with respect to that 10-to-1 ratio. famous movie directors and famous authors were. So when you consider that, when you consider like the way things are actually operating, and when you consider all of what has been presented thus far, I think it's a safe and reasonable assumption to make that even if the bureaucrats, even if it was an undemocratic bureaucracy, I think there's a fair amount of evidence to suggest that those bureaucrats had the best interests of the proletariat at heart and at mind and genuinely cared about doing socialism. And it really wasn't until the new guard came along, like the likes of Gorbachev, like the newer generation that either didn't live through or weren't born from the generation, but the generation after that lived, that only knows socialism and they don't know like the terrors of World War II. It wasn't until like Gorbachev and people like him came along, politically weak, like ideologically weak leadership basically came along and more or less dismantled and sold the system out. That's basically what ended up happening in the end. So, yeah. Again, this notion is bullshit. The notion that the Soviet Union was neoliberal. Maximizing outputs is not the same as maximizing profits. Maximizing exchange value is not the same thing as maximizing net material products. But again, profitability was a secondary indicator with respect to productivity. So yeah, there's no case whatsoever to make that the USSR was state capitalist. I mean, if to you socialism isn't something that is defined within political, economic, or scientific terms, that it's just a moral ideal that can only exist in your head, and because these projects didn't match within the moral ideal that exists within your head, you want to go on and then try to make the case that the Soviet Union was state capitalist. You're free to feel that way if you want. But don't try to sit here and act like I haven't provided a mountain of evidence for my case. So in summary, there is no case to be made whatsoever that the USSR or any of these projects weren't real socialism, because they fall perfectly within the describable definition of the term. Again, don't let these people like try to moralize and try to deflect from the actual economic discussion and the way that the economy actually operates and things that operate as is. In the future, I'm going to be taking some clips from this live stream and compiling it into a video. I'm not going to be taking the entire live stream right now. This is just sort of like a rough draft. But I appreciate you guys tagging along. If you guys have any questions, comments, concerns, feel free to voice them now. And we can talk about them. I'm going to go ahead and read some comments before we close. I mean, more or less, yeah. They prioritized material balances. I mean, later on, they put more emphasis on finance and returns on investment, which you can argue was an incorrect decision. But throughout the entire project, profitability was clearly not like the main driving factor of the entirety of the project. Great video or a great book about it is Socialism Betrayed, at least like the initial pages about it. There's other books that you can read and other there's other books that you can read and more information on the subject that goes into like the exact details of the interworkings of it and like what life was like. I think Socialism Betrayed is a good summary of basically the events surrounding the dissolution of communism and basically the internal deficiencies that basically were contributing factors to its own demise. I can summarize them for you if you'd like. There was a second economy that was developing on a parallel to the first economy. This was a thing. And not only that, but this second economy provided the material basis for cynicism, corruption, right-wing mindsets, material basis for counter-revolution. Due to the deficiencies of the political structure, and due to like increasing contact with the outside world, younger generations born into communism took for granted what they had. They didn't know what they basically didn't know what the implications of capitalism would really entail. Something of a counterculture developed. But basically, due to the lot of the economic issues they suffered from shortages, information lag, and other issues they faced, wait lines, and so on. Because of that, and increasing contact with the outside world, because information age was on the horizon, people came to associate communism with breadlines and stagnation, and associate capitalism with just innovation and freedom. And so basically, liberals saw this as a get-rich-quick scheme, and what ended up happening is younger, new blood generation came along that was politically weak, that wasn't really hardline leftists. They basically dismantled it from above, or set the stage for its dismantling, so that counter-revolutionary elements could basically come in and have their way. And basically, you got policy from Gorbachev that over his 5-year tenure paved the way for Yeltsin and various other ghouls and scumbags, which basically led to the inevitable dismantling of the project. Because by the mid-1980s, Soviet Union, if you were in the USSR by 1985 and you looked around and you spent some time in there, you wouldn't be getting the feeling of imminent collapse. In fact, both externally and internally, they were projecting the outward appearance of an industrial superpower with no end in sight, all the way up to the mid-1980s. It wasn't until Gorbachev came along and he started implementing policies that took issues that were already lingering, that had gone ignored for so long, and basically made them worse, and just fed into those problems and opened an avenue for opportunists to basically hijack political power and basically destroy socialism. So what do we got? So that's basically it. That's kind of a summary of what happened, but let me go ahead and see what else you guys got. Thanks for the stream. Isn't it directly related, but how do you give opinion on Enver Hoxha and anti-revisionist arguments against Soviet Union? I think some of them have validity. I don't think that the claim that I don't think the restorationist thesis or hypothesis is given. I don't think there's enough leeway to support the restorationist hypothesis, in my opinion, the idea that it was just state capitalist. I don't really think that there's a strong enough case for that, but there's certainly a strong case to be made that the system had some serious issues later on, and that there was that these issues basically compounded on one another, and that meaningful reform was needed to basically go to a higher stage of socialism. That's basically it. I think that there is some validity to their critiques, but I don't think there's a reasonable case to be made that the post-Stalin USSR was state capitalist. What are the Maoist arguments? Well, one argument that I commonly hear is they'll point to Kosygin or policy X, Y, and Z, and they'll try and single out singular individual policies that you could criticize, but I don't think by themselves necessitate the restorationist thesis. I mean, they support the case for revisionism, that they were on the path to capitalist restoration, but I don't think it supports the case that they were, in fact, capitalist. So, what else we got? Never let those who advocated perfection pretend that making that idea into a reality isn't going to look more gruesome than the ideal. That's a good point. Because there's a big difference between ideal and what can actually reasonably done on paper. So yeah, that in all is just kind of not just a post-debate review, but just a deep, in-depth debunking. Later on, I am going to be linking all these quotations in the Discord because I really want to go out of my way to dispel these myths. I am going to be, I guess this starts the beginning of the new arc, the new debunking anarchism and debunking infantile leftist critiques and anti-Marxist-Leninist socialist arc. Am I going to hop in VC anytime soon? Let me see. I mean, maybe later. I don't know. I've got a Pathfinder game I got to run today, guys. But if you guys got any other questions, let me know. I'm going to read some more comments. The Soviet economy is so different from capitalist countries. I don't get why anyone would say they're the same. It's because they're coping, dude. It's a massive, colossal cope. They don't like the aesthetics. They don't like the optics or the moral sensibilities of it. It offends their moral sensibilities because it doesn't measure up to their fucking privileged ass first world standards, because they can't factor in that it was a product of the times, and because they don't actually know anything. They just want to pretend like they know so much better. It's a combination of just coping, the Dunning-Kruger effect, and just idealism and individualist spooks. Yeah, guys, just ignore him. Trav literally just went over how these people use drama to get views to push their sophism a few minutes ago. But yeah, there you go. What do we got? What do we got? What's my opinion on Vicky 1999? I don't know who you are talking about. Do you think it was justified action what the Soviets did to Albania in the 60s? What, you mean sanctioned it? No. I mean, I think they should have maintained a neutral alliance, just maintained peaceful trade relations. I don't think sanctioning Albania and isolating it was the right thing to do. But at the same time, Enver Hoxha was part of the problem because he insulated the fuck out of his own country personally. I mean, it's kind of his own fault, self-fulfilling prophecy. So Soviets definitely leveraged their aid, and they definitely tried to influence the communist world and rein it into their hegemony. But that does not mean that they were imperialists. That just means they were a hegemonic force in the world. And you can disagree with that, and you can not like the nature of states flexing their hegemony and flexing their influence over other countries. But as long as we live in an imperialist world, capitalist world, socialist hegemony is going to be a necessary evil. And no, this is not a lesser of two evils argument. This is the argument that if you care about world socialism and communism, you should be willing to align yourself with the socialist hegemony, even if that socialist ideal is not perfect, has its flaws and its issues. It's better to align with that socialist hegemony and eventually be successful or have a chance at being successful at overcoming world capitalism. And then world capitalism has been overcome. We can have a conversation about reforming that system and making it better and more tenable to the ideal that we want to invoke in the real world. Anarchists don't understand this. Many don't understand. Many just want to ignore this point because, again, to them, this is just a huge fucking... it's a LARP. It's a spectacle. Narcissistic Weasel Man would be more authoritarian than Stalin if he were an actual leader. Narcissistic Weasel Man would go mad with power, like literally on the spot. I feel like market socialism is just capitalist realism. We can't exist without the market. I would say so, yeah. Because planned economy failed in their minds, then revisionism is basically the viable alternative. Since planned economy failed, we can try this because this apparently hasn't been tried. It has. It just doesn't work either. But yeah, it is a byproduct capitalist realism. They don't want to fundamentally change the relationship to the means of production. They just want to spread out the privilege to themselves and others. They don't care. They fundamentally don't care if there's inequality, and they fundamentally don't care if there's actual collective say in democracy. They just want to invoke their idealistic version of it that doesn't even make any fucking sense. But yeah, no, I would say that, as well as Dangism, multipolarity, the people who shill for Russia and China, Chinese imperialism. I feel like all this shit, as well as just people that align with so hardcore with China and so on, even though it's not even socialist, it's all one big cope. It's a cope because they can't get past the fact that the first real attempt at socialism was beaten. So therefore, we should go with all this other revisionist crap that's never fucking worked, basically. The principled path that's more difficult, less popular, requires a great deal more theory and understanding to make an argument for, that's not tenable, that has bad optics or aesthetics, so to speak. It's a more difficult path to go, so people are going to try to take the path of least resistance, which means taking the unprincipled direction. It means being a revisionist, an opportunist. It means not being principled. It means being a utopian or an idealist. It basically means not basically being a communist or Marxist-Leninist. So that's all I've got for that. The whole hierarchy and authoritarian critique of anarchists is not grounded in solid analysis anyways. There's never been an anarchist author that defined these terms. Ask them what they mean, and you'll hear different answers. But anywho, I think that's all I have to say. Y'all have a nice day. I'm killing the stream.